You guys today, DiJonai Carrington, after clotheslining Sophie Cunningham, running into the locker room, screaming, "That's white privilege!" Then tweeting 8/23, threatening Sophie Cunningham and the Indiana Fever. DiJonai Carrington now comes out and clarifies what she means when she says white privilege for the Indiana Fever.
So with 2 minutes left in the first quarter, DiJonai Carrington just slapped the dog shit out of Sophie Cunningham. Sophie pops up, she's obviously upset. DiJonai says, "Try me." And then look at Stephanie White. Look at her face. Look. She's mad as shit. Now, number one, this is obviously a flagrant 2. It just is. By the letter of the law, you gotta call a flagrant 2. We all know these refs are not.
That girl needs to be thrown out the league. She's not even a good.
A player bringing this kind of drama into the league is going to create serious problems. And that is exactly what happened after DiJonai Carrington was tossed from the game. Instead of taking the ejection, cooling off, and leaving the moment on the court, Carrington decided to take the controversy straight to the internet. There was no apology, no detailed explanation of what happened, and no attempt to calm things down. From the locker room, she posted just 2 words: white privilege. That was enough to send the entire situation into another universe. And even several days later, Carrington has continued defending what she wrote, explaining what she supposedly meant, pushing back against critics, and arguing with people who questioned the timing of the post. What began as one ugly basketball play has now turned into a massive off-court controversy, and the way Carrington responded might be one of the most bizarre reactions we have seen from a WNBA player this entire season.
Sophie Cunningham, otherwise known as MAGA Barbie in the WNBA, is a superstar player. She's one of the most famous female athletes in the world because she stood up for women in women's sports, saying only biological women should be allowed to play in the WNBA. And for that, she is literally risking her life. Check this out. This is what happened to Sophie Cunningham last night when she was clotheslined by a filthy, dirty player for Chicago who has a name that I can't pronounce, or maybe I just refuse to do that. That's my right as an American. But this is a player that has attacked Caitlin Clark, gouged her eye out, that had now bloodied the face of Sophie Cunningham, and as soon as she did this, she tweeted white privilege, meaning she's declaring this is a race crime. Now, if a white woman was doing this to black women, it'd be the #1 story in the world. She'd be banned from the league forever. But somehow black women are allowed to get away with this against white women. And it's white women in the league who make themselves a target by simply standing up for traditional values and
common sense matters when looking at the background here, because Sophie Cunningham has spent much of this season becoming one of Caitlin Clark's most vocal defenders inside the Indiana Fever locker room. Cunningham has repeatedly gone on record saying Clark is subjected to a level of physicality that officials and the league simply do not control well enough. She has pointed directly to individual incidents, called attention to certain players and plays, and even claimed that some opposing teams have discussed inside their own locker rooms the idea of showing Clark what playing in the W is really about. Those are not exactly comments designed to make friends around the league. Cunningham has understood that speaking so openly would probably make her unpopular with certain players, but she has never seemed particularly interested in hiding what she believes or pretending the tension does not exist.
Goo! That's assault, brother. You can't do that. What the fuck? Is this just the default if you can't think? Or if you just like don't want to take accountability for your actions? Oh my god, this league, bro, this league. Bro, white privilege while you're wearing a bleach blonde dyed wig. I mean, the fuck? What is privileged about that? You stone cold Steve Austin clotheslined her ass. What about that is white privilege? The WNBA stays undefeated. It truly does. They can't get out of their own way.
That history becomes extremely important when looking at what happened here, because it explains why so many viewers saw this foul and immediately wondered whether there was more behind it than an ordinary hard basketball play. Cunningham has already established herself as someone willing to publicly challenge the way Caitlin Clark is treated. Then suddenly Cunningham becomes the player taking a forearm across the face, getting knocked down, and coming away bleeding. Whether Carrington actually intended any deeper message is a separate question, and nobody can read her mind. But the perception surrounding the play was almost guaranteed the moment it happened. Cunningham's reputation, her defense of Clark, the violent-looking contact, and Carrington's immediate ejection created optics that were impossible to ignore. By the time officials finished reviewing the play, The broader storyline had practically written itself.
It's beyond concerning at this point how far from the plot we have actually gotten. And when I say the plot, I mean the basketball. How far from the game of basketball we have spiraled. When we're talking about the WNBA, you know, we used to joke, it's like, oh, 0 days without drama in the WNBA. This league is living up to it at a rate and a level of concern that we haven't ever had with all the discussion.
Craziness going on in the WNBA. DiJonai Carrington tweeted out white privilege from the locker room of a game that she was playing in. Get this, she fouled Sophie Cunningham hard. Sophie Cunningham, obviously white person, fouled her hard. Flagrant 2, gets ejected, goes to the locker room and tweets out white privilege in the middle of the game. Now here's the kicker to me. A flagrant 2 has to be contact that can lead to an injury that looks excessive. DiJonai, it was about as excessive as possible. If there was any evidence of there being white privilege, this was not it. What the hell do y'all think?
And Cunningham is hardly the only person who has noticed the tension surrounding Caitlin Clark. Earlier this year, legendary broadcaster Dick Vitale reacted after Clark finished only 9th among guards in a league-wide player poll. Vitale described the result as pure jealousy and predicted that players throughout the WNBA would eventually understand just how much Clark's popularity was financially benefiting everybody around her. That statement looks even more interesting now, after the Carrington controversy. Once again, you have a player closely associated with Clark taking serious physical contact, and instead of seeing universal concern afterward, a former teammate publicly celebrates what happened while the player's own head coach offers language that sounds unusually sympathetic toward the person who committed the foul. When moments like that keep stacking on top of each other, it becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss the possibility that Vitale recognized a real undercurrent inside the league.
Right across the face, coming down, trying to prevent the layup, but that is just a hard hit. That's definitely going to be upgraded, I think, to a flagrant 2, Ryan.
I think that is going to be a flagrant 2. There is
Get what you fucking deserve.
And just getting her out of the
Lucky
way.
it wasn't a right hook.
Make no mistake about it, Carrington targeted Cunningham. She targeted her because of her political stances. She targeted Cunningham because of the praises that she keeps receiving. She targeted her with a dirty shot that had absolutely nothing to do with basketball. And then after getting ejected, she runs to the locker room to play the fucking victim card. Like she didn't try to just take off Cunningham's head in 4K. Like we all didn't just watch it happen. That is not competition. That is a grown woman swinging on someone who she disagrees with and then screaming racism when she gets held accountable for it. DiJonai Carrington needs to be held responsible, and I'm not talking about just getting ejected from the game. She deserves a suspension. Maybe she'll think twice next time before she tries to take somebody's fucking head off.
The actual play itself is surprisingly straightforward once you strip away everything that happened afterward. Sophie Cunningham was sprinting ahead in transition with a clear path to the basket and appeared ready to finish what should have been a simple fast break layup. DiJonai Carrington chased the play from behind, closed the distance, and made heavy contact with her forearm across Cunningham's face and neck rather than making a clean play on the basketball. Cunningham crashed hard to the floor. Somehow the shot still dropped, but the made basket immediately became irrelevant compared with the contact everyone had just witnessed. Officials stopped the action, went to replay, reviewed the sequence, and ultimately upgraded the foul to a flagrant 2. Under WNBA rules, that designation brings an automatic ejection. The reasoning was not difficult to understand. Significant contact to the head and neck area, a player in a vulnerable position, unnecessary force, and a serious potential for injury. Everything officials needed to justify the upgrade was visible on the replay.
Like the way Sophie Cunningham came down on her leg, she could have been injured. So they said, yo, get out of here, dog. Get out of here. Then, I don't know if y'all were looking at her lips. She was talking about, try me. Try me. Yo, you already tried Sophie? You got all the samples of Sophie. You talking about try me. What are you talking about? This lady is unhinged right now, man. This is crazy work. And it makes you wonder. It's like, dog, you were the best player for the Sky at this moment. Look how she landed on the leg. Oh my goodness. Like, you were the best player for the Sky, and you decided to do this? You weren't even thinking about the game. You was thinking about some kind of revenge or something. Somebody sent you on a mission. You were on a mission, dog. I don't know what you had going on here, but DiJonai, this is unacceptable. Disrespectful, disgusting, and I'm glad they got you up out of there.
Cunningham immediately jumped back up, and there was absolutely no hiding how furious she was. She moved directly toward Carrington before teammates and officials stepped between them and separated the two players. But one detail from the officiating explanation afterward deserves attention, because it shows how serious the referees believed the original contact was. The crew chief explained that Cunningham did not receive an additional penalty for confronting Carrington because her emotional response was considered understandable given the severity of the hit she had just taken. In other words, the officials themselves acknowledged that this was not some routine little bump that Cunningham wildly overreacted to. They saw enough force and danger in the play that they believed her anger immediately afterward was reasonable. That matters, because the people responsible for enforcing the rules had already established exactly why Carrington was removed from the game.
We have a photo from the flagrant 2 on DiJonai Carrington against Sophie Cunningham where she proceeded to go into the locker room and tweet white privilege after being thrown out of the game. I'm not going to comment on that situation, but I will say this. This is a flagrant 2. Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, don't matter. This is a flagrant. I mean, she clotheslined her. What more do you want? So this looks very bad. It just shows that the WNBA is nowhere near where they need to be professionally. Because again, this is a clothesline.
And that is what makes Carrington's reaction afterwards so difficult to follow. If the officials determined that the contact was excessive and unnecessary, and if those same officials considered Cunningham's angry response understandable because she had just been hit in the face and neck, then what part of the decision required race to explain it? The foul was not upgraded because of Carrington's identity, and it was not upgraded because of Cunningham's identity. It was upgraded because one player struck another player high while she was in a vulnerable position trying to score. That standard does not suddenly change based on skin color. Any player who delivers comparable contact can face the same review and the same punishment. The officials were evaluating the basketball action in front of them, and the replay gave them more than enough evidence to reach the decision they made.
Don't even mention the fact that she said white privilege. That is the story. The story isn't that she got kicked out. It's that she tweeted out white privilege as though because Sophie Cunningham is white, somehow that's why she got kicked out. They go on to defend her, the story, the narrative that she's not a dirty player. She makes plays like this all the time. I put together a little clip of DiJonai Carrington, who is definitely one of the dirtiest players in the WNBA. I don't know if we can roll it, but she's taken her long fingernails. She's scratched Caitlin Clark's eyes out. She's had multiple instances of chasing people down from behind, trying the same swat and smashing them in the head and causing mini fights. She pulled another girl's hair. I don't know if we'll get to that clip in a second when she's falling. Totally dirty play. This is not a skin color thing. She has a history of making dirty plays, and it's fine. The NBA, you can be a rough and tumble league. Now, where this thing gets absolutely bananas is when you start making it into a race and culture war, and the people talking about it are not mentioning 99% of the time that she went back and tweeted white privilege. White privilege how?
But Carrington did not simply accept the ruling and move forward. Shortly after leaving the floor, she went onto Threads and posted the words white privilege, while directly tagging the Indiana Fever underneath. At that point, there was no detailed context explaining what she meant, and no separate subject attached to the statement. There were simply two extremely loaded words appearing almost immediately after she had been ejected for hitting a white opponent in the face, with the team of that opponent tagged right there in the post. Naturally, people made the obvious connection. What else were viewers expected to conclude from that sequence? Carrington gets thrown out, heads off the court, and then the phrase white privilege appears while Indiana is specifically tagged. You did not need some elaborate theory to connect the timing. Fans, commentators, and analysts across the sports world saw the same sequence and interpreted it in essentially the same way.
If we are paying attention to what DiJonai Carrington did to Sophie Cunningham, it was not a race-based decision. And to call that a white privilege-based foul is to completely undermine the term of white privilege and to also completely ignore the rules in basketball. You hit her in the head, you drew blood, you didn't connect with the ball at all whatsoever. So to me, it was just very ignorant and to some degree asinine by DiJonai Carrington to suggest that that call was based on white privilege. Have we seen examples of white players make that same foul and get away with it? Yes. Have we seen examples of black players make that same foul and get away with it? Yes. There was no white privilege involved in that specific call. DiJonai, you hit her in the head and you drew blood.
That is when Emmanuel Acho entered the conversation, and he was not gentle in his criticism. Acho argued that the situation had nothing to do with race and everything to do with the rules of basketball. His point was simple. Carrington struck Cunningham in the head area. Cunningham was bleeding, and Carrington did not make a meaningful play on the ball. He also argued that players of different races have both committed and escaped hard fouls over the years, which makes it difficult to frame this particular ruling as something determined by skin color. Acho described Carrington's response in extremely strong terms, including calling it ignorant and asinine, reflecting the frustration many viewers were expressing as the controversy unfolded. But the strongest part of his argument was not simply saying Carrington was wrong. He suggested that the original post looked like an emotional response made immediately after an ejection, followed later by an attempt to give the message a more intellectual explanation once criticism began piling up. His reasoning was that physical fouls occur between every combination of players imaginable in the WNBA, yet those incidents are not normally followed by a phrase carrying this kind of historical weight. Carrington responded directly to him, and insisted that she had never said the foul assessment itself represented white privilege. She told Acho that connecting the post to the ejection was his assumption, challenged him to use his critical thinking skills, mentioned his psychology background, and rejected the suggestion that she was ignorant about the topic. Carrington emphasized that she had attended a top university and had specifically educated herself on subjects involving white privilege, saying she would not casually weaponize a term with that much historical and social significance without evidence to support what she meant. But that answer created an even bigger question. If the phrase was not connected to the ejection, then what exactly was Carrington talking about? The post appeared almost immediately after she left the court, following the review and ejection, and Indiana was tagged directly. No matter how much she later argued that people misunderstood her, the sequence itself made the public's interpretation completely predictable.
DiJonai, you can't act as though you discovered the moon. You can't act as though you are the genius in a room and everybody else is idiotic. What I mean by that is, if you are going to suggest that we should think critically about a statement white privilege when you at the Indiana Fever, you didn't give us much to think critically about. You uttered a phrase, white privilege, of which is both incredibly inflammatory and also a very volatile word, but you didn't give us any context. So now we, as the interpreter, since you posted it publicly on Threads for the world to see, we, the interpreter, now have to try to figure out what exactly were you talking about? Well, common sense would deduce that you were talking about fouling a white individual and getting ejected for fouling that white individual. Now, as I said on social media and I will say in real life, if that is not what you were talking about implying, then that's on me. I will stand down and I will stand corrected. But the last thing I must again reiterate, we live in a speaker-oriented country. Speaker-oriented, receiver-oriented. Speaker-oriented country. It is on you, the speaker, to be clear, to be direct, and to be obvious with what you are speaking about. It is not on the receiver, the reader, or the listener.
Acho clearly remains skeptical of that clarification. His response on social media carried plenty of sarcasm, essentially saying that if Carrington truly insisted the post and the foul were unrelated, then he would technically stand corrected. But he also emphasized that communication puts responsibility on the speaker to make the intended meaning clear, rather than expecting millions of people to somehow guess hidden context. That is really the central issue with this entire controversy. You cannot publish a phrase as charged as white privilege within moments of being ejected, tag the team belonging to the player involved in the incident, provide no explanation, and then act shocked when people connect the two events. That is not some outrageous failure of reasoning by the audience. People were responding to the information Carrington herself placed directly in front of them. If she intended to discuss something completely different, then the burden was on her to make that distinction clear from the beginning, rather than correcting everyone only after the backlash exploded.
Sid Colson is saying this, and I know it's a joke. Love a trans foul. This is essentially celebrating a player getting clobbered. You are on TV. You are. Not these other people online. You are. You were on TV basically saying Caitlin Clark was soft for taking a fist to the neck from Alyssa Thomas. You are. You got opportunities because of this organization. You got opportunities because of the like Caitlin Clark brought on your head. You did. You benefited from it. You joined the Indiana Fever for those benefits. You took those benefits. You became more notorious. And as soon as you leave, you rejoin the sisterhood. Then it's against Caitlin Clark. And you are celebrating a player getting taken out.
Then the story took another strange turn, because Carrington was not the only person publicly reacting in a way that raised eyebrows. Sydney Colson, who had actually been Cunningham's teammate with the Fever the previous season, posted her own reaction and indicated that she loved what happened. Think about how unusual that looks. This is someone who shared a locker room with Cunningham, practiced beside her, traveled with the same team, and knew her personally as a teammate. Then Cunningham gets struck across the face and neck hard enough to bleed, and the response is not concern or even silence, but public celebration. That alone shows just how divided relationships surrounding Cunningham and the Fever have apparently become. This is no longer only rival fan bases screaming at each other online. When former teammates are openly cheering a moment like this, the tension has crossed into something much more personal. The division is now coming from people who previously stood on the same side of the court.
Yeah, I mean, look, it was a hard foul. I don't think that DiJonai intentionally came out to get her across the neck like she did, but it did happen, and I thought it was the right call. But, you know, one of the things about Nay is that she's going to play her butt off, man. She's going to compete. Nobody's going to go walking in for a layup. And so I don't oppose the hard foul, but I also don't think that she intentionally went for the neck.
Even Stephanie White, the Fever's own head coach, did not exactly deliver the kind of forceful defense of Cunningham that many people expected. White told reporters that she did not believe Carrington intentionally targeted Cunningham's neck, and said she did not have a problem with the idea of a hard foul, describing Carrington as a competitor and explaining that players should not expect uncontested layups against someone like her. That sounded strange considering White was discussing a play where her own player had just been struck in the face hard enough to bleed, and the officials had ruled the contact severe enough for an ejection. And the broader context makes the entire reaction even more complicated. Caitlin Clark and players connected to the enormous attention surrounding her have helped fuel an unprecedented surge in television audiences, ticket demand, sold-out arenas, and mainstream discussion around the WNBA. Networks build schedules around these games because viewers are actively searching them out. Buildings that once struggled to attract large crowds suddenly fill because people want to watch this phenomenon in person. Yet despite all that momentum, the league repeatedly finds itself dealing with scenes where the conversation shifts away from basketball and toward hard fouls, questionable contact, hostile reactions, and public comments that make the division even worse instead of protecting the product everyone is benefiting from.
Cunningham has literally been dragged. She's been called every name but a child of God. Coaches have come out and spoken against her. Fans have come out in the name of calling Sophie Cunningham anti-trans and transphobic. It's not far-fetched to say that the league itself in totality does not like Sophie Cunningham. And yet, after intentionally grabbing Sophie Cunningham around her neck and getting ejected for that, DiJonai runs to Twitter to say the reason why she was ejected was because of the white privilege Sophie Cunningham, a white, straight female, carries in a basically 80% black, almost 90% LGBTQ-led league. Oh yeah, that's where Sophie Cunningham is getting her white privilege, in this WNBA minstrel show of a freaking basketball league. That's where her white privilege is starting to show. DiJonai Carrington, you're a fucking joke. You went up thinking that you were gonna get the ball. You knew that you weren't anywhere near getting the ball, and so while you were up in the air, you figured this was your chance to grab her, Sophie Cunningham, around her neck and bring her down by her neck.
When you really think about that dynamic, it becomes difficult to understand. The same players receiving the benefits of increased attention, rising revenue, packed buildings, growing television interest, and potentially larger future paydays are sometimes the people appearing most resistant to the stars driving that attention. Cunningham's hit became only the beginning. Then came Carrington's white privilege post, the prolonged argument with Acho, Sydney Colson celebrating what happened, and Stephanie White sounding far less protective of her own player than many fans expected. And despite Carrington's later insistence that race was not being connected to the foul assessment, the timing of her original message remains impossible to erase. She can emphasize her education, discuss critical thinking, and explain her understanding of the historical meaning behind white privilege. But none of that changes how the post originally appeared to everyone watching events unfold live. Once people saw the ejection followed almost immediately by those words in the Fever tag, the connection had already been made. A later clarification can explain intent, but it cannot rewrite the sequence the public witnessed in real time.
You have one of your players who commits a clear flagrant 2 and then tweets white privilege right after she goes to the locker room. You can't then cry that this is being talked about in racial terms in a culture. She started that. This is a basketball play. The second you go white privilege, and they are talking about it on these telecasts without mentioning what she tweeted. Oh, they're turning into a culture war, turning into a race war. This is our league. Don't let conservatives or the right hijack it. Your player tweeted white privilege, and it had nothing to do.
And that is the uncomfortable position the WNBA now finds itself in. The league is enjoying extraordinary attention and a rating surge that organizations dream about, while simultaneously dealing with internal friction surrounding some of the names creating that growth. Carrington's on-court ejection was the simplest part of this entire story. Officials reviewed the contact, determined it met the standard for a flagrant 2, removed her from the game, and followed the process exactly as the rules require. The complicated part began afterward. The white privilege post, the later explanation, the argument with Acho, the celebration from Cunningham's former teammate, and the surprisingly soft response from Cunningham's own head coach transformed one flagrant foul into a much larger discussion about resentment, communication, division, and the culture surrounding the league. That controversy is not disappearing simply because the final buzzer sounded. If anything, everything that happened after the whistle may reveal far more about the current state of the WNBA than the foul itself ever could.